Good morning. My name is Jane Young. I have the honor and pleasure of interviewing my friend and colleague, Kathy Morante. Today is April 11th, 2023. We are at the Nashville Bar Association offices, and the interview of Kathy is being conducted for the Legal History Project of the Nashville Bar Association. Let's begin. Kathy,
Thank you, Jane.
would you give us your full name
Kathy Morante.
and your date and place of birth?
I was born on February 7, 1956 in Michigan.
All right, let's begin way back with your birth family. Tell us a little bit about your childhood, your grandparents, your parents, where you grew up.
I grew up in a suburb of Detroit called Bloomfield Hills, which, if people are familiar with it, it's a very well-off city. But I grew up on the grounds of Cranbrook, which started out as the estate of the Scripps Booth family. And my father, after World War II, became the chauffeur of the original family that owned that estate. So I had the luck, really, of being born into a family where my father was extremely working class, worked 3 jobs at Cranbrook, from driving school buses to painting buildings. But we lived on the ground since he was always on call. So I grew up in a very well-educated, cultured environment that normally people with the kind of background that my parents had would not have had the opportunity to experience. So I really benefited from that just piece of luck.
And you mentioned your grandparents. Could you tell us a little bit about them?
Yes, all 4 of my grandparents were born in Italy and immigrated to the United States, and specifically to the Detroit area. My maternal grandmother came here, didn't have any family whatsoever, but other people from the village outside of Genoa, Italy, were already here. And so when she turned 18, her mother and dad put her on a boat to the United States and didn't speak any English, and gave her a note card that said Detroit, and said, when you get to New York and after you do the immigration portion of it at Ellis Island, pin this to your shirt, and maybe someone will get you on the right train to Detroit. And I have daughters, we're well older than 18 now, but the thought of putting them on a ship going to a country that they didn't know how to speak the language, but obviously they knew that she had much better opportunities there than she would have ever had where she was.
So you mentioned that your father grew up on the estate that was located in Bloomfield Hills. You mentioned a little bit about that. Can you tell us about your schooling, your elementary school, your high school?
Okay. Well, Cranbrook has its own private schools that are extremely expensive to attend, an elementary school, and then both a boarding and day school for girls and a separate one for boys, but it's very expensive. And teachers who lived on the grounds, like we did, got to send their children to the Cranbrook schools, but the workers didn't. Started out from 1st grade to 8th, I went to a Catholic elementary school, and from there went to public school. It was always a little strange that the children who were also living on the grounds next to me went to a different school, but really can't complain at all. The high school that I went to in Bloomfield Hills was just excellent, and somewhere upwards of 98% of the graduates would go on to college.
And so can you give us an example of the type of student and their families that went to Bloomfield Hills High School?
They were all extremely well off. Many of them were the children of very successful automotive executives, and a lot of the people in Bloomfield Hills, the fathers generally worked for the auto companies, one of the big 3. So they tended to be very, very, very smart. It was not diverse at all in terms of race. I believe we had the daughter of one doctor who was African American. We had some Jewish students, but not a lot. it was very much a, white Anglo-Saxon high school.
Okay. What about your activities in high school?
I didn't do very much of it until I was very, very lucky to have had a particular teacher, Mr. Sundin, who I was in his class, and he happened to be the debate coach. I was very quiet. I didn't have a whole lot of self-esteem. I didn't really speak up in class much. But for whatever reason, he asked me to come out on the debate team, and I refused. I couldn't imagine, that. But he kept after me, and I finally did. And it's probably why I ended up becoming a lawyer. Nobody in my family was lawyers. Very few had ever been to college. But it turned out I was pretty good at doing the debate team, and I enjoyed it. And it really made a huge difference. So that was the one real activity that I was involved in that really has stayed with me.
And that type of debate, you had to learn to take both sides of a position. Is that correct?
Yes, I did. I got wonderful training for being a lawyer, and to this day confounds friends and associates, because I have a natural tendency to do that. And I have my own strong political opinions, but when I hear somebody, even who I agree with, if they're saying something that I think doesn't make sense or might violate the Constitution, I'm gonna, we'll end up taking the other side. And it can be irritating, I think, but definitely a good training for being a lawyer.
So moving forward, it came time to apply to college. And where did you go to college, and what did you major in, and what were your activities?
Well, I went to the University of Michigan. I had to go to a state school, and because again, my parents didn't have a whole lot of money, but they were able to, and we're very proud of the fact that they were able to put their kids who wanted to go through college. But it needed to be state tuition, and fortunately, Michigan was a wonderful school. I was able to get into Michigan. My teachers in high school all told me I wouldn't get in, because I was a terrible, and to this day remain a terrible math student. One of my daughters has dyslexia, both in numbers and letters, and I believe that is part of the reason that I've never done well in math that I have, but the same. I remember my high school counselor telling me she'd never seen anybody with as low a math score and as high an English score on their SATs as I, and that the combination would never get me into Michigan. But I was very lucky. So I went to Michigan. I ended up taking a Bachelor of General Studies, which was a hippie degree left over from the 60s, where you didn't have to take a language, because I also couldn't seem to learn a language my first year in college, no matter how much I tried. And the only requirements for a Bachelor of General Studies was you had to take I don't even remember now, a fairly high percentage of upper level courses. And that was all. I ended up meeting all of the requirements for an English major, however, so I was pretty much an English major.
Did you tell us about influential courses or teachers in college, friends that had an influence on you?
I think that for me, the philosophy courses that I took there were really important. I think it made me, as I said, I've always wanted to argue, but I think the philosophy courses helped balance that with some understanding of the ancient argument, ancient philosophy. And that really meant a lot to me. And there were a couple of professors there who were in the philosophy department, and as well as a couple of the English professors who encouraged me to actually go on and teach English, which is what I thought I was going to do at the college level. And for a while, I thought I would do that, but mostly because I didn't think I'd ever be able to do well on the LSATs. And then eventually decided to take the LSAT and did okay.
Did you work during college?
Oh, yes, I worked all the time. Everything from, in the cafeteria in the dorm at first to working in the philosophy library, which was the best job of all because it's a small library that very few people except the professors and graduate students used. So it was great to be able to do homework. But I had to work in order to be able to purchase my books. My parents paid for the tuition, but just didn't have quite enough. So books and clothes were my responsibility. So I worked every summer at whatever summer job was available, and then worked, while I was going to school.
So, moving forward, how did your interest in law school begin? You've mentioned debate and the philosophy classes in college, but what really made you decide to take the LSAT and go to law school?
It had always been an interest of mine, and growing up as a teenager and then in college, I watched anything that was on TV, Watergate, all of those things that were being live at the time. I had an interest in trials. I read books about the Supreme Court. It was just an interest. I don't know that there was any particular thing. There were no lawyers in the family at all. I didn't have college graduates. My father had to quit school in elementary school because it was during the Depression to raise money for his family. And my mother got a few years further education, but didn't graduate high school. And that was just the way of the times, but they were very supportive of any kind of educational opportunity. And it just seemed like law clicked for me. And when I first told my parents about that, they told me the story. I had an older brother who ended up working for Ford Automotive, but he was very talkative as a young child. And my maternal grandmother said, he's going to grow up to be a lawyer. And then she would follow that by an ode to be a lawyer in America, as if it was something she could hardly even imagine for any of her grandchildren. And I think that had an effect on me too. Okay, I'm going to see if I can do this. And because I'd always been very poor in standardized testing, I really didn't think that I would do well enough on the LSAT to be able to get into any law school. But I ended up doing okay. So it was what I wanted to do.
And you applied to law school, and where did you get admitted, and where did you go?
I ended up getting admitted to William and Mary and DePaul and a couple of others that I don't even recall now. And I ended up going to DePaul in Chicago. And it was a real adventure for me moving to the city and living in the city. I liked it very much. I really liked the folks that I was in school with and my professors. I had been dating and continued to date Michael Principe, who I went to high school with. And Michael had graduated as well from the University of Michigan. He took a year off after graduation while I was doing my first year of law school. And he was interested in getting a philosophy PhD, and he had applied to a lot of programs. And he ended up getting an offer at Vanderbilt where it was a wonderful scholarship opportunity. And I applied to be a transfer student and then transferred them to Vanderbilt. Graduated from Vanderbilt.
So that's what brought you to the Nashville area.
Yes, I'd never been in the South. I'd never even, it was a whole new place for me, but it's turned out to be a really wonderful stroke of luck.
At Vanderbilt, did you have students or faculty members who were influential?
Yes, I would say I felt a little bit like a little out of the norm for Vanderbilt. It's just at the time, especially Vanderbilt was, very sort of buckled up and conservative. in terms of a lot of different issues. And coming in as a transfer student when people have formed bonds in their first year is always a little difficult, but I got to be friends with several people. And I think the most influential for me to just actually feel like I kind of belonged were the clinical instructors, Sue Kay, Dave Kozlowski, folks like that. And I ended up being involved in that program, and it sort of made me feel a little connected to the university.
And was that your third year?
Part of the last part of the second and then third year I was involved in that.
Can you think of, you mentioned that Vanderbilt was conservative and buckled up. And I like to ask this, having also been in law school, and that is, what percentage of your class would you estimate was female, or were women?
Goodness, I would say back then, maybe 15%. I'm not sure, but there weren't a lot of us.
Did you ever feel odd or experience anything that made you feel different because you were female?
Yeah, I don't have a lot of memories of that. I do remember our Wilson Trust teacher, if any female asked any question that was perceived at all as challenging, they were called honey. And that surprised me that was still happening. But I didn't. When I got into then the practice of law after graduation, there were certainly some judges in Nashville that I felt that way about, but I didn't feel it too much at law school.
What is your assessment of law school in terms of its curriculum and its preparation for you to be a lawyer? How would you describe that?
I think that because I chose to include a clinical aspect, that I was much better prepared than students who might not have chosen that, because that gave you a realistic idea of what the practice of law might be. And I'd like to see more of that, and maybe there is these days. I do think it helped to read and to think. I think law school helped prepare. There was just so much of that. I think that is a good thing. The emphasis tended to be so corporate or big firm oriented, at least at Vanderbilt, that, and I don't know that it still is. That was obviously many years ago. I graduated in 81. But that I'd like to see it be more diverse, and not only by race and sex, but by thought. And it wasn't so much back then.
Let's just shift a little bit and talk about your family. Your spouse,
Okay.
Children, grandchildren.
Okay. I was married for 14 years to Michael Principe, who I came to Nashville with, and we divorced after about 14 years. We're still very good friends. He teaches philosophy at MTSU, and blessed to have two children with him, identical twins, Karen and Leslie, who are in their 30s now, and both have chosen, I guess they're because identical twins, I don't know, both have chosen masters in, trying to think of the right term. We all think of it as library science, but they call it something like data studies, or I'm not sure, but library science, and both of them are librarians. In fact, Leslie is at the University of Tennessee Law School, and they're doing well. And then I married Bob Watkins, who Bob was the purchasing agent for Metro, and then the chief purchasing agent at Metro Schools for a bit. And he had, when I married him, he had two children, one that was just getting ready for college and one that was in high school. Bob and I were married for several years, and then he died from cancer, which turned out to be caused by his time in Vietnam. So he had Agent Orange caused lung cancer, which angered me. You know, all these people we lost in Vietnam, and here we are continuing to lose people from Vietnam experience. But I have two wonderful stepchildren. Ben is a firefighter here in Nashville, and Sybil is in her first year of residency in internal medicine at Vanderbilt Hospital. And she has really come a long way, been through a lot with her dad at a young age. And it's always hard being a step parent for those people that are. I think it's the hardest job in the world. I think it's much harder than being a parent, especially after Bob passed, and wanting to not make a single mistake, which I'm not capable of not making mistakes, but wanting to not make a mistake with Sybil. And she had been through some hard times in high school. She had anorexia and had to go away for some treatment. And after her dad passed, I was really worried about her. But she has come through like a champ, and wanted to be a doctor, and fought hard to get where she is, and now is just doing an amazing job.
And I know that a lot of that is credit to Bob, of course, but and to you.
Thank you. It was challenging at times.
So they've all chosen careers that are not in the law, other than being a librarian at the University of Tennessee School of Law.
Yes,
So,
yes.
Let's shift back to your career as a lawyer. Tell us about your taking of the bar exam, where you took it, when you passed it, and your first job.
Okay. I stayed here in Nashville. My first job with what was then called Legal Services in Middle Tennessee, and since it's been named Legal Aid of Middle Tennessee. I had a fellowship out of Howard University that gave fellowships for 2 years to work at Legal Services, and I took that and was working at the Nashville office under Ashley Wiltshire, who was just an amazing person. So I was working there while I was taking the bar, and scared to death I would fail it, because not only would I fail it, but I would lose my job at that point, because I needed to have passed the bar. I took the bar at Vanderbilt. And my recollection is that a call went around back in the old days that, hey, the results were out, and there were pieces of paper taped up to the outside of the building where the Nashville, bar, not the bar association, I guess the law examiners was. And I remember going out there, and you were just hoping to see your name, because if it wasn't on there, you didn't pass. And there were all kinds of people gathered around, and sure enough, my name was there. It was a scary moment. It really was. Now it's so much better for people that can just find out online in the privacy of their own room and that kind of thing. But that all worked out, and I was able to obviously then continue working at Legal Aid. I was assigned to the domestic violence division, or the domestic division, and had two of the best female lawyers ever in town who were working there, who showed me how to do things. Dot Dobbins and Juliet Griffin, just wonderful. And so that's what I did for 2.5 to 3 years.
And so you would probably describe them as mentors.
Yes, absolutely. And just they're both just fantastic lawyers. And there were female lawyers obviously in Nashville, but not that many. So to be able to, my first job out of school, to have two female lawyers to be able to mentor with is, looking back at it now, that was just amazing.
What drew you to this type of service, advocacy for those who cannot, pay, as opposed to the corporate environment of, as you described, Vanderbilt at the time?
I knew that I didn't want to work in a big firm or to do corporate work. It just never had any interest for me. I knew I wanted to be in the public sector or doing advocacy work. The truth is, though, I really didn't know exactly what I wanted to do. And when I saw that there was a possibility of applying for a fellowship at legal aid, I thought that sounded, like what I really wanted to do. And it turned out that every person there really was wonderful. And I really was dedicated and very strongly believing in advocacy for the domestic violence victims that we served, as well as we did a lot of child support for women who really needed that money to be able to live. But after I was doing that for a while, every one of my clients had so many other problems because they were in poverty that I couldn't, I was helping them in this area, but I couldn't help them much more. And it wore on me. And I just realized after a time that wasn't something that I could do. I admire folks like Ashley and Dot and others Dot Dobbins, who spent their careers doing that I just couldn't. And I didn't know what I wanted to do. It's kind of strange, but I was like, I didn't know. I was talking with another attorney at Legal Aid who at that point was looking for something else. And he said to me, the Attorney General's office is looking for lawyers in several different of their units. And I thought, well, okay, I'll try that. And he also said to me, back then doing criminal law wasn't cool. I think it's kind of become that way. And, as some years have gone by, he said to me, you may be interviewed by several deputies of the heads of the different units. If you say you want to do criminal law, you're more likely to get hired. So I said I wanted to do criminal law, and I got hired in the criminal appeals section. And again, it was just fate smiling down on me, because doing appellate law at that time, doing a constitutional, common law was my favorite law, my law course in law school. This was an opportunity where you really got to do it. And I ended up loving criminal law and spent the rest of my career doing criminal law related. I love it. Was exactly what just spoke to me.
At that time, who was the Attorney General?
I was hired under Mike Cody, but it wasn't very long after I came that Mike Cody left and Knox Walkup. No, who became Attorney General after Mike? Charles Person. Well, but not Knox.
That's
Walkup.
I believe that.
Yeah.
I believe that General Cody had come in after Bill Leach retired.
Right. Yes.
And his chief deputy was Knox.
Knox. Okay.
They had known each other before,
yes.
and
yes.
they both came in
yes.
at the same time. And then later,
yes.
Charles
Person. I thought that Knox was like acting for a while, and that might be
at some point, but I think that was way down the line.
Yes. Well, yeah, I don't have great memory for things like that, but I do remember. I definitely remember working many years under General Person.
Do you recall at all who folks that were in the criminal division when you first began?
Jerry Smith was the deputy who hired me. Quite a character, just a lot of fun to listen to, great stories. I'm sorry he's not around to be interviewed, because he'd have all kinds of crazy things to talk about. Gordon Smith, who was a wonderful lawyer and taught me an awful lot about effective appellate representation. There were others that came later after I was Deputy Attorney General that I look back on now, even though I have no reason to be proud in the sense I didn't have anything to do with it. But I look at Jennifer Smith, who's now a criminal court judge here in Davidson County, was someone that I had hired when she was a relatively young attorney. Kim Helper, who recently passed, was the Williamson County DA. So there were a lot of really good attorneys that came through that division.
Most of your work, almost all of it, of course, was appellate
advocacy. And before I was in the Court of Criminal Appeals and Tennessee Supreme Court. How are those briefs written? I think that might be interesting to folks as technology has moved along.
It really has moved along. When I first started, and for several years, you would obviously get the record to read from the trial and the other side's brief. And when you got ready to file to write your brief, you would either long write it out in longhand, or if you were one of the ones who were more advanced technologically, you would. And what I did was have some written out, but mostly an outline, and then you would dictate it by dictaphone, and one of the secretaries would type it out. And use whiteout to do corrections. When I got to the AG's criminal division, they had one huge computer that had a name that I don't remember. But there was one secretary, Karen Stone, who operated it. And so if you had a really big brief, then it would go to that machine because it was computerized. But for everything else, you dictated, and the secretary typed it out and got it back for corrections. And then obviously things, progressed from there. I remember when the AG's office, was a big deal. We all got Dell computers, and that was Patsy Cottrell, who later became judge. Was
They were those Wang.
oh well, yes, first they were Wangs and it was Patsy Cottrell who just got us all excited about getting to use those Wang computers. I don't think they exist anymore.
I don't know. There was a crude email.
Yes. Yes. Those
That
were
we
the days.
used,
Yes, those were the days.
on the Wayne computers. Did you also do? I believe that this has separated out at the Attorney General's office now as they've gotten larger and so forth. But did you also do federal habeas corpus work?
Yes, back through the entire time I was there, in addition to doing the criminal appeals, we would do federal habeas corpus cases. So we would appear in federal district court on habeas cases and follow them through the Sixth Circuit. I think it's good that it was separated later because it's a separate kind of expertise, but I was appreciative, looking back on the fact that I did get a little bit of federal court experience that way, and I got to argue before the Sixth Circuit as well, which is, many times, several times. One time on bonk, I got to, scariest moment of my life. I argued before the Sixth Circuit on bonk, and so many judges sitting on that half circle that, when one would ask a question, you'd have to physically turn in order to make eye contact. So obviously that's in Cincinnati. My mother had passed away, but my brother and my dad drove from the Detroit area up to it was the only time they'd see me argue.
Well, that's exciting. Talk about some of the more challenging and interesting cases that you had. I know that you handled more than one death penalty cases on appeal.
Yes, yes. At the Attorney General's office, I handled several death penalty cases. And they're all challenging in terms of the law, and sometimes in terms of the emotions that might be involved, that might be caused by looking at the record and looking at the photos and the videos and that sort of thing. One of the cases that is the biggest case that I had when I was there is Payne versus Tennessee, which is a case that was out of Memphis, and it involved Purvis Payne, who was convicted of murdering a woman in an apartment building and then murdering a little girl and leaving a little boy for dead, a toddler. He got the death penalty, and in closing argument by the district attorney or the assistant district attorney in Memphis, they made some comments about when the little boy grows up, he's going to ask what happened to his sister, and your verdict's going to tell him. Some comments like that, which were arguably in violation of admitting victim impact, which was barred both by the Tennessee law and U.S. Supreme Court. Tennessee Supreme Court found that it was if it was error, it was harmless, and so it then went to the United States Supreme Court, and the United States Supreme Court at that time had two prior cases which very clearly outlawed any mention of the victim during the sentencing phase of a capital case. I mean, they were existing precedent. The court, we realized, was the United States Supreme Court had granted the petitioner's cause request because we believe now, were looking to overturn, at least some of them were looking to overturn that precedent. So that was a huge case at the time. We filed, our brief. I wrote that brief for the Attorney General's office. The Department of Justice came in as an amicus on our side. In fact, they asked if they could have 10 minutes of our time to argue, which doesn't happen routinely. Of course, we said yes. General Burson did the argument. We went up to DC about a week before, because there were moot courts that are done by the National Association of Attorneys General. While there, we had learned ahead of time that the Attorney General of the United States at that time, Richard Thornburg, was going to argue personally, which was exceedingly rare. And he had invited us to the Department of Justice to sit on his moot court. So had the opportunity to sit on his moot court. And at that time, I met the Solicitor General of the United States, who was very pleasant, very formal, whereas General Thornburg was very informal and very pleasant. They were kind of a contrast. Didn't really know who that person was, but later on, he became a name, and that was Kent Starr. So, so that argument, I got to sit at counsel table for the Payne versus Tennessee argument with General Burson on one side and General Thornburg on the other. Those, if you've been to the United States Supreme Court, you know that if you sit at table, you get a complimentary quill pen. I'm very proud to have two of those now, one for that and one for a case that came later. And General Burson leaned over to me. We were the first case up and waiting for the court to come out. And he said, "Hey, Kathy, my wife's got your pen for you, so you know it's safe." I said, "Thank you." And then General Thornburg, the Attorney General of the United States, turns to me and he says, "Kathy, did you get your pen?" And I'm like a little embarrassed, like, "Oh yeah, yes sir, I did." He goes, "Where do you get it?" I said, "Well, from that person over there." He told his, "Be sure to get me my quill." So that was, that was a wonderful experience, and that case is still, I mean, it had huge ramifications. It allows, in a limited manner that they specify in their opinion, for victim impact to be introduced in a sentencing phase in a capital case.
You know what the status of Purvis Payne's execution is at this point?
He, as far as I know, he is still on death row. He has not been executed. There are people that claim he's innocent and that there is evidence that was untested. And I don't know the status of that because
Obviously,
that was after. Now,
Sure.
there are other death penalty cases where I, was involved in post-conviction and where there have been executions. We had an execution of Coe in Davidson County at the main prison. Oh my gosh, it was back excuse me, that was back in about 2000, I believe, that Coe was executed. It was the first execution in a long time, and I was at the prison in the warden's office in order to be able to give him any legal advice should there be a last claim. So I've been involved.
You mentioned that you were also were able to sit at council table in another U.S. Supreme Court
Yes,
case.
yes.
And what was that?
That was a case that in terms of law ended up not being very important. It was a case that I had bonded some with the family and that sort of thing. That it was Middlebrooks, and Middlebrooks and his at the time juvenile companion essentially kidnapped a young Black boy who had set up a table along Gallatin Road in Nashville to sell some things. And they tortured him, raped him, and finally killed him. And he was convicted in Davidson County, and he received the death penalty. There was a technical issue, in some ways technical issue about the statute that the Tennessee court set aside the death penalty on, and it had to do with the fact that felony murder, which is what he was convicted of, was also used as an aggravating circumstance. And our Tennessee Supreme Court said you can't do that. We took that up because they had done it on the basis of the United States Constitution, and the United States Supreme Court granted our cert. I briefed it again, went with General Burson, and that case was orally argued. In the time after it was orally argued, but before the court issued an opinion, the Tennessee Supreme Court, in an unrelated death penalty case, in a footnote said, oh, by the way, Middlebrooks was also based on the Tennessee Constitution. So the case ended up being dismissed as improvidently granted. So,
Are there other cases when you were in the Attorney General's office that were particularly meaningful or interesting to you?
The cases that I remember most, just like as I went on to my next step in the career, always tend to be ones where there was something unusual about the victims or what was done to the victims. I mean, any murder, any killing of anybody obviously is horrible, but there were murders that were just horrific. And so I guess if one were to come to mind, it would probably be Oscar Frank Smith out of Nashville, who killed his girlfriend, mother of his children, and then there was his children were not at that location, but his two stepchildren were, and he gutted them. I won't go into details, but I mean, it was really, really horrible. I've looked at a lot of photos, a lot of crime scene videos. Those were bad, but the piece of evidence in my mind that's still there, that I guess some people would say, there's some level of post-traumatic stress when you do these kinds of things, but I can still hear the little boy called 911 and gave his address as 54 Moody Street, address here in Nashville. And you can hear it, but and then there's another little boy in the back who had to be enhanced, and he's saying, "Don't, Frank, don't." But the 911 operator asks again for the address, and he has to repeat it 2 times, and each time that he repeats it, it's softer and harder to hear because the blood is going out of his body. That those kind of things just stick with you.
So obviously, much of as you've developed criminal law, besides being interested in the constitutional aspects and the legal aspects, have also been an affinity with victims.
Absolutely. One of the things about doing appellate work is that you may feel that, but you are really disconnected a step from actual victim interaction because you're doing appellate work. When I was at the AG's office, after I became deputy, I realized that we weren't in touch with victims at all, even in death penalty cases, because statutorily, the DA's office is supposed to be in touch with those folks. That's to keep them apprised of their cases. But in reality, it's the AG's office, excuse me, who's doing that work. So I was able to get the first victim advocate, Lisa Helton, who's with the Department of Corrections, and to be in touch with them after a death penalty case and before. This is what's happening, because it may be years out, and so they would find out: is this? Do you want to be kept in touch about arguments? Do you want to be present? Here's what's happened. Here's why. But we didn't have a whole lot besides in death penalty or very, very serious homicides. We didn't really have a lot of one-on-one victim interaction. And when I moved on to the DA's office, that was one of the real big pluses for me of being an assistant DA, was then you actually had people face to face that you knew, relatives of homicide victims or the rape victims, whatever your case was.
When you were at the Attorney General's office, you think back as to particular lawyers that had an influence on you, your practice, the way you approach things?
I think Gordon Smith, who I mentioned before, really did. He managed to do a very effective job, but he was the kindest, most civil in terms of interacting with people of almost anybody that I've met. And Jerry Smith, who was the deputy, was really effective at talking about how to be an advocate in oral argument. You want to be an advocate, you want to be a strong advocate, but there's a line obviously in appellate court that you don't want to be too flamboyant. And Jerry did a really good job of showcasing how you can be an advocate, obviously respectful of the court, but not just very boring. Some appellate attorneys tend to be pretty boring.
What was the influence of General Burson on you?
Oh, wow. General Burson. General Burson was difficult to work with. He was kind of a perfectionist. He and I got off initially on the wrong foot. He came by after he was the Attorney General to introduce himself. He saw my Michigan degree. He went to Michigan, and he asked what dorm I'd been in. I told him. I said, "What dorm were you in?" He said, "East Quad." I said, "Well, when I was at Michigan, East Quad was for jocks." And he took offense to that, and he said, "It was when I was at East Quad too," because he apparently was an athlete, and I had assumed the opposite. But he pushed me to be my best, although he could be really, really difficult to work with. He expected your best, and I think because of that, I really did push myself. I would write drafts of Payne versus Tennessee or Middlebrooks and give it to him, and he'd throw it back at you literally. But so you wanted to do a good job, and so yeah, I think it made a real difference. I remember late into the night before back in the days that the Supreme Court briefs had to go to a specific printer company, so you had to, old days you had to get that draft in, and it had to be there because it had to be done by them, and the timelines were so tight. We've been through several drafts, and I'm trying to get the last few pieces on it, and he kept calling. I'm at the office, and he kept calling about this or that or the other thing. So I finally got fed up and answered the phone. "Joe's Pizza Place." And he said, "Oh, I'm sorry, wrong number." But it was wonderful working for him in a lot of ways.
Oh, I'm sorry. That is funny. So how long were you at the Attorney General's office?
About 14 years. About the last 6, I was the deputy of the criminal justice.
And you mentioned some folks that you hired as the deputy that have gone on.
Right. Yes. Yeah. People that have done, just a lot of people who have done really well and gone on to other things. Just a great group of people.
So what did you do after you left the Attorney General's office?
I went to work for Tori Johnson, the district attorney in Davis County. Mostly, I think, people are either appellate attorneys or trial attorneys. But I kind of fell into being an appellate attorney and I enjoyed it. But I think I always wanted to try doing jury trial work. And that's what I ended up doing when I came over to Tori's unit. He'd had me over before I became an official, before the job switch became official about a year earlier. The Middlebrook case, which I mentioned earlier, had to have a sentencing hearing done because we essentially lost in the Tennessee Supreme Court and the US Supreme Court because they dismissed it. And so he had to have another sentencing. And John Zimmerman, who was the assistant DA on the case, asked if I would come and try the sentencing case with him again. So, I mean, looking back on it, it was really crazy to do it. If I'd been smart, I probably wouldn't. I'd never been before a jury. When I was at legal aid, I did divorces, and to go before a jury for the first time in a capital sentencing was really kind of, but I did. And really, I enjoyed being in front of the court a lot and thought, okay, I think I want to try this. So we got to a certain point with the AG's office where I thought it was time. And Tori had an opening. And so I went and did that. I was not assigned to general sessions because I had some experience and ended up over time working, with different judges, but doing, a variety of criminal cases.
So felony cases.
Yeah, felony cases. I worked a few death penalty cases with Tom Thurman and Roger Moore, including Paul Reed, which was, obviously got a lot of publicity. People were here at the time. Remember him as somebody who held up McDonald's and killed 2 workers and shot another and left him for dead, and then killed the workers at a Captain D's, and then also at a Baskin Robbins, although that was in Montgomery County. And so we tried Paul Reed for the crimes and for the death penalty in 2 separate crime cases, both the McDonald's and the Captain D's.
So the McDonald's and Captain D's were 2 separate trials.
2 separate trials, 2 separate cases where he went in and stole the money, took the money, and left people for dead. And one of the people was at the Captain D's was Sarah Jackson. She's a 16-year-old girl. All of them were tragic, but her age, and she has a really wonderful family. And that case is probably the primary example of being one-on-one with crime victims, especially murder victims' families. The Jacksons went through that. I mean, awful time with so much grace. It really, all of that, doing the victim work in that case particularly comes to mind. It's really, it was just defining. Absolutely.
And you kept in touch with them.
Yes, there are some
Long after
yes,
the case was
yes,
completed.
Yes, still in touch with them. And again, they're amazing family. Their son, who was in the service at the time, is distinguished state trooper. I was able to go to his graduation. He graduated from trooper school, and really amazing. And that people can survive that kind of thing. It's just, it's so difficult. They all want to know why. I just want to know why. And the thing is that, I mean, there was a reason. Paul Reed was stealing money, and he knew from being convicted of armed robbery in Texas that he didn't want to leave any witnesses, but that's still not really why. That doesn't, it doesn't really tell you why. And so many victims' families, I just want to sit down with them once and have them tell me why he had to do that. Never happens, and there isn't any reason.
At the district attorney's office, what was your caseload like? I mean,
It was heavy. You almost always had a case that was set for trial on trial weeks, which were every week except when there was a holiday mixed in for a short week. That doesn't mean you actually tried that case, because still in Davidson County on any Monday trial day, there'll be several, cases set to go to trial. And many cases will end up pleading out that day, but those that don't, the most serious case with the person incarcerated goes first. Well, you weren't trying cases every Monday, but most Mondays you had a case that might go to trial. So you had to be prepared, because you never were really sure which cases were going to plead out at the last minute. So you almost always had a case that was maybe going to go to trial. Maybe not a murder. If it was a murder, you probably were going to get to be the ones that was going to go to trial. The others you didn't know. But so you had that, and the rest of the days of the week, because it's it's a big city. You had other dockets that you had to be at if you weren't in trial. If you weren't in trial, you usually had a couple of days, which was great, because somebody else was trying a case in that court, so you could get ready for your other things. But probation hearings, motion hearings and cases. You were in court pretty much all day, every day, except when you didn't have a trial, and then you were still in court, 3 or 4 days a week. So it was a heavy schedule.
you were able to meet with witnesses beforehand?
Oh, yes. That was, the Davidson County office at that point. I don't know what they do now, but had a very, very strong and victim witness staff, just wonderful people who were sort of the they were the person in the bridge to the families, but definitely would meet with families in cases.
Police and so forth?
And police, it depended. Certainly, if you were going to be in court on a motion, you would talk with officers ahead of time. So you're so busy that a lot of times you might not have talked to all of your witnesses, police witnesses, until you had your pretrial conference, which was the Thursday or Friday before trial. You had all of their reports, you had all of their writings, but you would get them all in one place and say, okay, and then you'd find out, well, I don't need you because this person covers both, and that sort of thing. So you kind of work it out. But certainly in any trial of any significance, you would have a pretrial conference where you would definitely meet with and as time goes by, you establish a relationship with particular detectives and rely on them for all kinds of things.
Can you describe, or did you have what you would describe as mentors at the district attorney's office?
Yes. I would say Tom Thurman was somebody that he wasn't a mentor in the sense of working a lot one-on-one, but he was somebody that every time I tried a case with him or watched him do a case, I learned a lot. Trying cases with Tom was educational, and he was an important a person. There were just, I know this sounds crazy, but just about everybody at the district attorney's office was really good at what they did, and you could learn things from. In terms of getting advice and talking to people, Rosemary Sexton would come to mind. Rosemary had been at the DA's office forever, did general sessions work, but she was a go-to person for me. So in a lot of ways, I would say, in terms of a mentor, kind of one-on-one, she was definitely a go-to person.
And you've been there for a while. Were there younger lawyers that you worked with that came in?
Yeah, a lot over time. Oh boy, just so many that many of whom have moved on to other DA's offices. Sarah Davis, I loved working with Sarah Davis, and she is, the best domestic violence prosecutor I ever saw, and the fiercest that I ever saw. And she is in Murfreesboro now, after the great, it was Friday, where many people were fired after Glenn Funk took office. Many of the really best prosecutors left and went to other DA's offices. I would say Sarah Davis would be high up on my list. There are still some people from Tory's office at the district attorney's office who are very, very good that I work with. Jan Norman being among those people.
Brings us to your current job. When did you leave the district attorney's office and where did you go?
I left the district attorney's office in 2014. So it's been a little while now. I always think it's just a few years ago until I actually stop and think about it. I was still enjoying my time at the DA's office. Tory was still DA at the time, and really, really enjoyed Tory. And I should have mentioned him earlier. I don't think citizens realize, your average citizen, how important the job of district attorney is, how much power they have. And they really do. And Tory ran that office with the utmost integrity, no political interference, nothing. It was all based on what evidence did you have and that sort of thing. So Tory was still there. But I was getting a little older, and you know, I was thinking, I think, not entirely, there are definitely exceptions to the rule, but if you're at the DA's office and you're trying cases, which is what I enjoyed there, I think it's a young person's game in a lot of ways. Your adrenaline just gets pumping, and it's great, and then after 3 days or 4 days when you get your verdict, it's like kind of a dump. But you're still in court a lot. And I knew I could continue doing it for a while, but I knew that I couldn't continue to do that kind of pace until retirement, whenever that would be. And it just so happened that a position came open in the Metropolitan Nashville Police Department that sounded interesting. And it was the Director of Professional Standards position. Nashville, very unusual. Because for years, not a recent thing, for years they've had a civilian who was over internal affairs. That's not the case in most police departments. It's usually a sworn high-ranking officer, but that's not the way Nashville does it. So that position came open, and it sounded really interesting to me. And I went through the interview process, and got the job, and decided to do it. And it's been really great. That's still where I am. Since I've been there, additional duties were added. So the main thing is, it's not called internal affairs, but that's what everybody would know by it. And 12 detectives that work there and investigate the cases. So any serious complaints about officer conduct come through there. In addition, I oversee all of the legal training at the academy, and I love to teach. So I can't do all of it because we do a lot, but I teach the recruits. And I think a lot of times people don't realize that. I was sort of surprised by how much law they have to learn. You have to learn
Certainly probable cause.
probable cause, common law issues, in terms of search and seizure, also statutory issues about what can you do in a misdemeanor? When can you arrest? And there's 12 exceptions, and there are musts, and there are mays, and there are what's mens rea. I mean, there's a lot that we expect them to know, and be able to act on without briefs and a lot of time to think about it, sometimes under very stressful circumstances. So I really enjoyed that part of my job. I also oversee a unit that we have called case preparation that gets the papers and the cases ready for the DA's office so that they have all that they need after a case has gone through general sessions and been bound over. It's not very exciting, but it's real important. I also have human resources investigations. I don't do human resources, but when an investigation is needed, if an employee says, hey, I've been the subject of discrimination or something like that, I have investigators who handle that.
And who was chief when you took the job?
It was Steve Anderson, who I loved working for. He was also a lawyer. And so really it was very easy to talk to him about issues that might come up because he also was a lawyer. I really enjoyed working for him very, very much. Still to this day, I'm in contact with him and benefit from his wise experience. A couple of years ago, we got a new chief, John Drake, who had been a deputy chief in Nashville 4 years. So, we have the benefit of knowing him before he came, and he's just wonderful. And his story is an amazing story. East Nashville, grew up poor with parents who were disabled, one was blind, and he shares publicly very, very often that a lot of the people he grew up with are on the other side of the law, but he's just a genuinely good person and doing a great job. So, but we were always a little nervous when a new chief comes on, but I've been thrilled working for Chief Drake.
Are there, and know with the type of job that you have, there may be limits, but are there activities in the community that you're involved in that you'd like to talk about at all?
No, there are things that I do, but I used to be particularly involved with a church that I was attending, but I'm kind of not so much anymore. So no.
Okay. All right. Well, let's move on.
Sure.
I think we've kind of come to the end. What would you advise young people to have a career in the law?
Yes, I have loved being a lawyer. I know a lot of people don't say that or don't feel that. I have absolutely loved it. And I would encourage anybody who feels the bent to be involved to at least, check it out. As you know, and anybody watching this probably knows, there's all kinds of ways you can be a lawyer and use your law degree. And I think that's a real advantage. For me, I would have been probably one of those lawyers who wasn't happy being a lawyer if I had gone a different way. I mean, I knew what I didn't want. I didn't know what I did want. And if I had just gone ahead and, gone the other way, I probably would have been not happy. So I think that you have to, within it, you have to figure out where your niche is and go with that. Even after while I was at the AG's office, I was offered a couple positions different times with private firms, with some good firms to do some appellate work and that kind of thing. And frankly, at the time, I was a single mom for quite a long period, and while I was getting paid a decent salary at the AG's office, it was nothing compared to what a private practice offered. But I knew that just wasn't for me. So I think if you're going into law in order to make money, and that's what's really going to make you happy, then maybe that will make you happy. But you need to think about that.
What characteristics would you describe that are important for lawyers?
I think being open-minded to our arguments, to be willing to listen to what another argument is and to make a counter argument, and to be willing to do that. And sometimes in our society today, I think people are afraid sometimes to even articulate certain positions. I think you have to be able to articulate it. Not that you don't have firm opinions that you hold, but in order to be able to advance that position, you have to understand the other person's position. And if you're not listening and willing to see that what the positive points may be, you're never going to be able to advance the position effectively that you want to have advanced.
Do you think the future is bright for the law? I mean, do you believe that society is going to be able to
I'm going to be an optimist here and say yes. I think if you watch the news, and I've always been a newsaholic since I was a young child. I always, I think you can get pessimistic extremely really, really fast. But while they're not lawyers, what keeps me optimistic is that when I go before a new academy staff of 40, 50 young people, and sometimes they've had other jobs or whatever, sometimes they're right out of college. They just, their earnestness, their desire to do things right and to learn, it gives me optimism.
Good. I think this is a good way to stop.
Thank you.
So much, Kathy.
I've enjoyed this. Thank you.